Okay, I think we're live, and it's 5 o'clock, and that means it's Holocaust Film Club with the Holocaust Educational Trust. Good afternoon and welcome to you all. My name is Ben Fuller. I'm an education officer at the Holocaust Education Trust. I'll start that again because I should probably get the name of the organisation of my job right. I'm an education officer at the Holocaust Educational Trust, and it's great to be with you this afternoon. We're going to talk about the film The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas today, and it's generated the most in terms of comments and interest of any of the films that we've done so far, which is great, so thank you for all the comments that you've made. I'm going to try and pick up on a few things that different people have said. I also want to really recommend, specifically for any teachers viewing or generally educationalists, students as well, we're going to be putting up a link on the comments section in just a minute, or that will direct you to our Teaching the Holocaust in English guide, which has a section specifically on this film. And I don't want to spend the whole of the next half an hour talking about it just from a teaching point of view, because we're not just teachers that are watching this, we're not just teachers that are engaging with it, and you know, it's a conversation piece for anyone, inside or outside of education. So I'll start off with the usual kind of quick précis of what the plot is. There will be spoilers, but the assumption is hopefully you've watched it by now, so apologies if you haven't. And then we'll get into what different people have had to say and some of the things that are kind of popping up in my thinking as well along the way. So, released, it was based on a book by John Boyne, of the same name. Boyne was Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, and it was directed by Mark Herman, came out in 2008. And what we see with this film is the story of a young man, a boy called Bruno, who is the son of a high-ranking Nazi official who is transferred from Berlin to a kind of undisclosed space, but rural, and his father is going to be the commandant of what appears to be a concentration camp stroke death camp. We'll come to the problems with that very shortly. It's based on Auschwitz, so we can kind of accept that. Bruno is not a kind of Nazified youngster. He's managed to avoid taking any interest in his father's work and what's happening in the world around him, apparently, and is completely oblivious to things. And when he sees these people who look very unwell working in these striped pajamas, he assumes it's a farm, and in his boredom takes an interest, eventually finds a way out of the garden and finds his way to the so-called farm, where he runs into a little kid who's sitting by the fence hiding from doing any work, and that kid is called Shmuel, and they strike up a friendship, where you have the German Nazi on one side of the fence talking to a Jewish youngster on the other side of the fence. Clearly Bruno is not engaged with what the problems of this are, although as the film goes on, his father arranges a tutor for him, and he begins to get a sense and an understanding that they're not supposed to be friends. Shmuel's already kind of down that road from the start. There's a couple of interesting scenes where Bruno's confronted with this problem. One particular one where Shmuel is working in the house, and Bruno offers him some food, and then when the guard comes in and suggests that Shmuel's stolen the food, Bruno totally betrays his friend, and Shmuel is taken away and beaten. And then the film concludes with Bruno finding out that Shmuel's lost his father, and so digs under the fence into the camp to go and find the father with Shmuel, maybe as an act of reconciliation, who knows. And they are led to the gas chambers and die. The father and mother and sister of Bruno realise what's happened too late, and are devastated by the realization of what's taken place. So very, very quick synopsis of the film. I'm going to pick up on two or three characters specifically in a couple of minutes. But first, I just thought maybe it'd be worth saying what did the papers say when this film came out, and what did people in the know say. It's quite interesting, really, to see how warmly received it was. The Times referred to it as a hugely affecting and important film. It's got a very touching and haunting family that deals with the Holocaust in an interesting and unusual manner, and packs a brutal punch of a twist. And it certainly is a brutal punch of a twist, certainly for the age range that it's aimed at, and we'll come more to that in a while as well. I'm just being told I've got some background noise, so I think I'm going to have to just run over across the room. Please excuse me for a second. I'm going to shut the door. It gets a bit warm in my house, you see. Okay, hopefully the background noise is gone and you just stuck with me and no background noise. Maybe it would have helped. Anyway, so let's have a look. So there was a very warm reception for the film, and it won several awards, nothing particularly high kind of faluting, but it was and People's Choice Awards as well as that. So there's some very positive things that have been said about it, but there was certainly some negative stuff in the press. A New York Times article that I found was quite scathing, I thought, starting off, and I'm not going to read the whole thing but you'll see the pattern. See Bruno run, see Bruno see a farm, see Bruno see farmers in striped pajamas. She's small at the farm. See Schmall run because men are yelling. It goes on like this. It finishes with see the Holocaust trivialized, glossed over, kitsched up, commercially exploited, and hijacked for a tragedy about a Nazi family. Better yet, and in all sincerity, don't see it. Okay, so mixed reviews, but broadly speaking, very positive within the sort of general press. What is interesting is how it was received within maybe slightly more of the academic community. The late Professor David Cesarani wrote a very kind of well-worded and deeply explained review, which you can see in the guide that I've pointed you to already. So I'm not going to pick up on too much of his things that he said. However, I am going to pick up on just one quote, I think. Yes, it says, however much we're supposed to think Bruno's fate will prove to his Nazi parents that mass murder of people just because they are Jews is wrong, the alternative moral to the story is that you should keep a closer eye on your kids. And I know that this is a slightly tongue-in-cheek thing that he's saying, but I think there is something going on there where basically, and we'll do this in a minute, once you've kind of stripped away all of the historical inaccuracies of the film, you're kind of left with these universal messages, one of which might as well be keep a closer eye on your kids, because he's able to sneak out of his house and sneak into a concentration camp. But we'll come to why that's an absolute impossibility in a minute. The last quote I want to read for you is from not a historian, but a literature professor, Dr. Robert Eaglestone, who's from the University of Royal Holloway, University of London, and former teacher of mine, actually. And he was pretty scathing with this book, and you can find his entire review on Amazon if you want to. He reviewed the book as opposed to the film, but broadly speaking, the story is the same. For starters, I'm going to pick up on a couple of points that he's made. One of which is that subtitling it a fable doesn't help or excuse any of the problems with the book. And again, he goes in with a few comments that are worth us picking up on. he says this: the story occurs in a sort of mythical Holocaust land, just as if one might set a story in a mythical World War II land which claimed to be historical, in which Winston Churchill and John Wayne saved Private Ryan whilst blowing up the guns of Navarone. Now again, there's a clear tongue-in-cheekness to this comment, but what he's trying to say is that this is such a historically inaccurate film, and the setting and the context for all of the messages, the twists, the relationships is so kind of messed up that really it doesn't do anything any justice, including its universal message. So let's just unpack a few of those points. And then we're going to start off by just looking at a few characters. And then I do have a whole range of comments that people have made on Facebook, and I don't have enough time to share them all, but there are certainly a few that are worth kind of picking up on. So, all right, let's have a look at the characters. So Bruno is our main character. Let's start with him. He's a 9-year-old German son of a high-ranking SS official who apparently has no understanding of the world that he lives in, and it's just impossible for that to be a real situation. Okay, this is a fictional story, but even in fiction, you'd assume that you'd start on some kind of basis of something that is plausible, and there's a very deep lack of plausibility to this. As a 9-year-old German boy, he would be very aware of many of the issues that were around in the country at the time. Of course he'd be aware that there's a war on, there's a sort of implication that he's not even understanding that that's happening, but he would certainly also be aware of Nazi racial policy through the teaching that he would have had at school and the teaching that he would have had at home. And whilst he was too young to join the Hitler Youth, which started at 14, there were younger age group clubs for children to go to at his age. So he would have been immersed in a world of Nazism and in a world of racial ideology. So the fact that he has no understanding of this is well and truly beyond the pale. Okay, we can accept that he may have been a bit kind of away with the fairies in the scenes where he's having his tutoring. That comes across. But beyond that, there is still it still kind of beggars belief that he would be quite so innocent as the film portrays him. Another character, I suppose we should come to Shmuel as well, and I mean, this is a sort of a quick answer to why this is problematic, and the number one reason why the character of Shmuel is problematic is because he simply would not have existed in that space. There are a minuscule amount of exceptions that we can find in history of cases where children did live in Auschwitz. But the reality was, and these may have been from the Theresienstadt family camp, or if they were non-Jews, then in the Gypsy family camp, as it was known, Roma Sinti family camp, as we would call it today. But Shmuel wasn't part of that, and that's not part of the story. There was a part of Auschwitz that was set aside for families, the Theresienstadt family camp. This existed for a short period of time and was liquidated in its entirety by the Nazis. So everyone in that family camp who, for reasons of propaganda purposes, where the Nazis were potentially going to use footage of them in that camp to show the Red Cross that, look, our concentration camps aren't so bad, people live in families, they're healthy, they're happy, they wear their own clothes, all that kind of stuff. That happened, okay, but it didn't take place in any way like the film is trying to portray. So the fact that Shmuel, as a 7, 8, 9-year-old child, could have existed in Auschwitz is a virtual impossibility. So the whole of the story is based on this relationship between these two people, and one of those people would most certainly have had an understanding of Nazi racial policy, and even if it was basic, he still would have known that Jews were an enemy to them, and the other one quite simply wouldn't have been alive. The unfortunate reality is that women and children, by and large, were sent directly to the gas chambers. On average, maybe 15% of a transport of people that went to Auschwitz would be put to work. That's not to say that they were it wasn't a life or death decision, that selection. It was death now or death later. But boys of that age were not were virtually never selected. So there's a premise of the story that we just can't get past from a historical accuracy point of view, which is that Shmuel cannot have existed in that space. Beyond that, we need to talk about the situation of their relationship. Bruno meets Shmuel at the camp fence, and that's another important historical inaccuracy within the film. The fences at concentration camps were very heavily guarded. They were also electrified in most cases. In the case of Auschwitz, it was an electrified fence. The story is based on the idea that it is kind of a representation of the Auschwitz camp, so that's what we can base our critique of it on. And yes, as I say, so this would be a very heavily guarded and electrified fence. So the opportunity for discussion across that fence is zero. I remember when I visited Sachsenhausen a few years ago, different camp, Italy, but a Nazi camp just north of Berlin. I was told about how the guards at the fence had a 2-meter exclusion zone, and anyone who came within that exclusion zone on either side would be shot. And even some of the more sadistic guards played a game where they would take the hat off the inmate and throw it into that exclusion zone, leaving them with a horrendous situation where if they don't have the hat, they're liable for a punishment, and if they go and get the hat, they're liable to be shot and killed instantly. So again, the premise of the story is based on a complete historical fiction, which can prove to be damaging, and I'll come to that more in a little while. The third character I want to pick up on very quickly is Bruno's mother. She's possibly one of the characters we might develop a sense of empathy with throughout the film. She is apparently unaware of what her husband is taking part in until it becomes clear that this camp is gassing Jews, which is told to her by one of the other orderlies that's working in the house. And again, very, very problematic representation of how relationships in that kind of a space would have worked between the high-ranking SS and their wives. Again, since the story is based on a kind of representation of Auschwitz, let's look at what the reality was with the commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Höss, who lived 100 feet away, or 100 yards away from the first gas chamber that was built at Auschwitz I, and he brought his wife and his children to that place to live, and his wife described it as the happiest years of her life. She was fully aware of what was taking place. Höss actually broke protocols and confided in her what was taking place, which she absolutely fully supported. She made use of all of the benefits that the camp could bring her personally and her family. For example, she had inmates make dresses for her. She would frequently order things, luxury goods that had come on transports that belonged to the Jews who had been sent to the gas chambers and had been stolen from them, and she would just take what she wanted. She knew what was happening. She was absolutely okay with it, and she described those years as the best of her life. It wasn't always the case that the wife of a commandant would know what was going on. I'm reminded of the Treblinka death camp, where Franz Stangl was the commandant, and he attempted to keep his wife from knowing what took place at the camp. However, one night when he was out, some of his men came round. They were drunk at the time. Alcohol was very much the way that the Nazis used was something that the Nazis used in order to dull the senses and kind of make bearable the life that they'd given to the SS men who were charged with manning these camps, and also out of the front when the Einsatzgruppe and those who murdered by bullets were plied with alcohol. So a group of SS came round to look for Franz Stengel, couldn't find him, and in their drunkenness just told his wife what was taking place. When she found out, she was not happy, to say the least. She was troubled by it. However, and again in contrast with the film, her response was to remain the supportive wife, was to protect the secret that she now held. And when Franz Stengel at the end of the war escaped out of Nazi Germany to Italy via the Vatican, through Syria, and eventually to South America before he was eventually caught in the 70s, she maintained his trust. She didn't tell his story, and always tried her best to sort of defend him. So we're dealing with a character in the mother of Bruno who doesn't reflect an accurate picture of the kind of historical record. So Bruno doesn't reflect an accurate picture of the historical record. Schmoll doesn't reflect an accurate picture of the historical record, and the mother doesn't reflect an accurate picture of the historical record. I could go on through the characters, but I don't think we really need to. But I do think that it's really important that as we watch films like this, we understand that they are films, that this is a work of absolute fiction, and particularly when we're taking this into an educational environment, that we have to have a serious grounding in the pitfalls and the problems of the film before we even consider taking this into a classroom. As our posts have already said, and as is our kind of belief on this, we would just not encourage anyone to use this film in a classroom because of all of these problematic areas. And there's research that backs this up. I'm going to refer first of all to the UCL's 2016 published research, which found that the boy in the striped pajamas is having a significant and significantly problematic impact on the way young people attempt to make sense of this complex past. What they are finding is that students want to believe the story, and I found this in myself in my own kind of when I was previously a history teacher, and I remember setting a task where students had the choice what they could do, but one of the things they could do was a film review. So having learned about the Holocaust, they could review a film and critique it for its historical accuracy. And even when they'd had a thorough and deep learning experience around the Holocaust, not just a couple of hours, like a proper scheme of work, still found that students found it very hard to detach themselves from this story. Now, in many cases, I think this was partly because they'd already seen it, so I found myself having to kind of unteach the story for its historical inaccuracies. But the Centre for Holocaust Education's research shows that it's not just me who's had this problem, so thank goodness I wasn't that bad of a teacher. It was people generally struggling students generally struggling to, having seen the story and then learn the history, to connect the history to the story again. Another bit of research by Holocaust educator Michael Gray found that children believed that the story contained a lot of useful information about the Holocaust. Bear in mind what I've just said, that pretty much everything that underpins the story is based on complete unreality and a distortion of the past. The majority believed that it was based on a true story. He also found that many students drew false inferences from the film, such as assuming that Germans would not have known anything about the Holocaust because Bruno's family didn't. Again, based on, and we know that people knew, certainly high-ranking Nazi families knew, or even that the Holocaust stopped because a Nazi child had accidentally been gassed. So if this is what the film is doing for students understanding of the Holocaust, then clearly it's doing a lot more damage than it is good. And for that, that's a strong part of the reason why we would always say that it's just better not to use it in the classroom. I want to just come back to Shmuel on another area which we think is really important in our work generally, but again is something that I think is portrayed particularly poorly in this film, and that is the issue of humanization. For us, humanizing all people involved in the Holocaust is an essential part of learning about it. And one of the key areas where this is, clearly this is a film that's based in the German experience, the German family, albeit, completely out of proportion to what reality would have been like. But the Shmuel character is a really interesting one on this too. And again, it's problematic, unfortunately, because what we get to know of Shmuel is that he's Jewish and that he's a victim. And beyond that, there really isn't much to say. So how does that humanize the Jewish people, the Jewish person of the story? We don't find out his background. We know he has a father, but beyond that, there's not much to say. We don't learn about him as a human being. And again, this is problematic because it very easily sends us into a narrative of Jews as victims and a kind of a faceless mass. And what we really don't want to do is reinforce any kind of stereotype like that. So again, there's this problem of humanizing. And I think it's kind of interesting that when there's sort of comments that have come up about how this is another film that sort of locates itself within the German Nazi perspective. And just to make a quick contrast with our last film, Jojo Rabbit, which made no attempt to present itself as a kind of historical piece of work, perhaps the comedy element of that, the satirical element kind of made it very clear that this wasn't trying to say this is a true story. But Jojo Rabbit is the same age as our main character, Bruno. His mother is clearly anti-Nazi, and yet he is completely 100% sold out. He wants to be the best Nazi he can possibly be for Hitler, and that's a much more accurate representation of a 8-9-year-old German child in the 1930s and 40s than Bruno, who is unaware of his sort of situation, unaware of the situation around him, and therefore much easier to sympathize with, but based on very little historical evidence and very little reality at all. Okay, I'm noticing that we're at 27 minutes past. I'm supposed to try and keep this to 30, so I'm going to come to one final element which I think is quite problematic before I just share a couple of things and then we'll head off. The real twist of the film is how towards the end Bruno crawls under the fence. By now we all know that this is an impossibility, but he's crawled under the fence to join Shmuel in the camp to try and find his father, and they are corralled into the gas chamber where they are told to strip their clothes off, head into the gas chamber, and then the lights go out and we all know what happens next. Now, there was a comment that came in, and I must apologise for not having read more comments from you guys. And I know that there's a whole range of comments that are coming through the thread as I speak, and I'll try and have a quick look through some of those in a minute. But one comment from Megan Filkins said, firstly, he picked up on that the film focuses on empathy for perpetrators. And that is a serious problem. But she also says, as a child, I found the final scenes incredibly harrowing and upsetting. So much so it gave me nightmares and put me off learning about the facts and evidence of the Holocaust for a long time. We should ground children's learning in facts as opposed to over-sensationalized and harrowing images. Well, we at the Holocaust Educational Trust absolutely agree with you on that, Megan, and we would never recommend graphic and harrowing imagery being used in the classroom. We believe that we can learn about the Holocaust without having to go down a line of potentially traumatizing the students that we're working with. And number one in our responsibility when we're in the classroom is a duty of care for those students, and so we certainly shouldn't want to leave them feeling like they're going to have nightmares no matter what we're teaching. But I want to pick up on particularly that scene there is, within academia, within the wider sort of world, there's a debate on how far it is possible to take representation of the gas chamber into any kind of artistic world. This is a space where we do not have witnesses. This is the space where Primo Levi described them as the drowned. The people, the vast majority of people that went to Auschwitz went straight to this place and didn't come out alive. So to take this film into the gas chamber is a remarkable move for a film designed for children, and I think that that's kind of worth picking up on. And you know, the next film that we're going to look at in a couple of weeks is the film Son of Saul, which is a Hungarian film. It's a 15 rating, or is it an 18? I'm not sure, but it's not one for the kids. It will be one for the adults out there. It's not one that we would suggest bringing into the classroom at all, but this is the Holocaust Film Club, so we're going to discuss Holocaust films, and we want to discuss some of the older age group ones as well. So the next film we're going to do is called Son of Saul, which is situated around the gas chambers, and we'll talk about it more next time, but the way that it's represented is arguably in a more sensitive way than this family children's film does so, and I think that that's another reason to have some definite question marks hanging over this film. Okay, I'm going to finish off with a couple of the comments. It has to be said that the broad span of comments from you guys in the last couple of weeks on Facebook and on Twitter has been sort of fairly unanimously in favour of not using this as a Holocaust educational resource. So I feel a bit like I might be preaching to the choir here, but perhaps some of the things that we've discussed in this session, and as you look through the comments, will give a sense of, okay, this is what I can use to explain to a friend who does think that it's a good thing to use or does see the value in it. And I absolutely understand that there are elements of the story that do discuss prejudice, that do discuss how racism is learned behaviour. Our point is, go and find a book that does a better job. Go and find a film that does a better job. There's plenty there. Again, I'll point you in the direction of the link that we put in the comments, where we have a range of other options of literature, children's literature. I would say that, you know, on reflection, I would probably argue more if you had to put a Holocaust film on, then the boy in the striped pajamas will be usurped by Jojo Rabbit, despite the fact that Jojo Rabbit is a comedy, is very deliberately fiction, but raises questions that maybe have you don't have to unpick and unteach things that the film presents as fact. Quite a few comments about this recurring theme of German family, or good or innocent German families. One comment from Kellyanne said that her son studied this in primary school. She didn't think it portrayed events very clearly. The school followed up by visiting the National Holocaust Center and Museum, which balanced out the children's understanding of the Holocaust. And I think that I'd probably rather that we didn't have to balance it out from the start, that we didn't have to start from kind of behind zero, but if we base our teaching of the Holocaust on the facts, then maybe watching a film like that later on is an opportunity to recognise the inaccuracies, albeit understanding the nature of children and the nature of film that presents things. The film doesn't have to say it's historically accurate for us for young people to think that there's something in the story, as evidence has suggested. Okay, so just a few. I'm just going to quickly read down the comments. Thanks for the important area of discussion. You're welcome. Popular film, it's tidy and kitsch and tear-jerking. It is tear-jerking. I've spoken to countless people who have seen the film, read the book, who said, you know, it is a powerful film, and that's okay. As a film to be a tearjerker, we don't have a problem with it. As it to be an educational tool, we do. And I would probably say from the position of a Holocaust historian, then it kind of gripes, to say the least, with quite how inaccurate it is, quite how much it plays with history in a fairly insensitive way. Do publishers have a duty to label these fictional books with warnings that they should not be used for Holocaust education? Well, thanks for the question, Han. I would guess that they don't. Otherwise, I think we'd have a big stamp on the front of this one. But it is a kind of interesting thing that this is, has become a huge success as a book, as a film, culturally speaking. But the problems haven't been addressed, which maybe speaks to the lack of understanding from people in those areas. And it's not their job to know that stuff, but maybe it should be someone's job to kind of look through this. The message for me, thanks Susan for your comment, the message for me here is about teacher education. Children will read this book, but teachers have to be well informed enough to contextualize their understanding. I absolutely agree, and I do think that it's really important for teachers to kind of have a sense of what the reality of what they're teaching about is. I've got a former colleague and close friend who takes the same issue with the book Private Peaceful, which is a World War I, and again sort of doesn't embrace the complexity of the reality of World War I and doesn't really represent much of it very accurately, which leads to problematic stuff when you do get around to teaching it. And I suppose there's a question here about when we address these things, with often the book coming up before the historical learning about the Holocaust. And maybe if we could switch that around, then that would be one way around it. Having said that, like I said, if you want to address racism, prejudice, there's other books out there that do a better job. And if you want to do it within the context of the Holocaust, then there's other books out there that do a better job. Okay, what about parents who buy it with good intentions? They themselves may not know the facts from the fiction, which is a really good question. And I think that, I want to be fair to all concerned, that I don't think there's ever a time when this isn't being used with good intentions. So it is that kind of the need to understand, and as a when you're bringing something to a young person, to know what you're giving them, to know where it fits, and to know what's accurate and what's not. So perhaps it encourages people to do some their own research first if they're gonna dole out Holocaust fiction. Okay, I'm very aware that I'm now on 37 minutes, and that's naughty, isn't it? So it seems to be a recurring theme. I apologise that I'm taking up some of your evening. It's just got sunny over here. I think it's always sunny when we do film club. It was rainy this morning, but sunny when film club comes on. So maybe I'll let you all go. Have yourselves a lovely evening. Just one thing to mention before I do, which is that my wonderful colleague Kat is going to be putting together a short video which is designed specifically for teachers, just sort of picking up on some of those problematic issues around teaching with this book and film, and why we would really encourage you not to, and perhaps offering some alternatives as well. So do look out for that on Twitter and Facebook. In 2 weeks' time, it's an adults only one. I'm afraid, kids. We're going to look at Son of Saul. So do have a watch of that in the next couple of weeks. As ever, please share with us your comments, your questions throughout the next couple of weeks. It's really helpful to get a sense of what questions and what areas of these films you guys are interested in. That's what I can respond to. Been a bit of a different one today, with us having a clear position on the film as opposed to maybe a slightly more balanced approach to some of the others. But we do feel it's an important one because it is so it's very, very popular, but it's also incredibly problematic. So I hope this has been useful to you, and I wish you a lovely evening, and see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye bye.